He was a powerful executive, but blind to his own loneliness. Everything changes when his mother mysteriously disappears and he finds her in the arms of a young homeless man. This unexpected encounter sparks a transformation neither of them could have ever imagined. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you've ever heard. The traffic on Park Avenue was at a standstill that rainy Thursday in July. From his office window on the 23rd floor, Robert Miller watched the car lights form a river of red and white, stretching as far as the eye could see. At 42, he was at the helm of one of New York's largest real estate development groups, Miller and Associates, responsible for erecting luxury high-rises in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. His routine was timed with military precision. Meetings began promptly at 7 a.m. and only ended hours after the sun had set. That night, it was nearly 10 o'clock when Robert finally shut down his computer and loosened the Italian silk tie around his neck. Another day of signed contracts, another project approved, another few million added to the quarterly revenue. The numbers were impressive. The spreadsheets showed constant growth. The investors were satisfied. But there was an emptiness to all that success, a hollow echo that Robert preferred to ignore, drowning it out with more work, more commitments, more goals to achieve. He picked up his phone to check his messages before leaving. 17 missed calls, all from a number he knew well, his mother's apartment on the Upper East Side. A sudden tightness in his chest made Robert unlock the device with trembling fingers. Before he could return the call, the phone vibrated again in his hand. It was Maria, the housekeeper, who had been taking care of his mother, Helen, for over 15 years. The voice on the other end was choked, caught between barely suppressed sobs. Helen had left early that morning for her usual walk through the neighborhood park, just as she had every day for years. She should have been back in an hour, 2 at most. But it was 10 at night, and she hadn't returned. Her cell phone was off. None of her friends had seen her. No neighbors knew anything. The 72-year-old woman had simply vanished. Robert felt the floor drop out from under him. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure, that controlled demeanor he used in the most tense meetings. But inside, a whirlwind of guilt and fear was beginning to form. When was the last time he'd visited his mother? 2 weeks ago. 3. How many times had she called, and he'd promised to stop by over the weekend, only to cancel at the last minute because of some work commitment that seemed more urgent? He raced down to the parking garage, got into his luxury sedan, and sped through the rain-soaked streets of New York. The rain hammered against the windshield as he called every contact he knew. He phoned Judy Peterson, his mother's best friend, who lived 2 blocks away. Nothing. He called Mount Sinai Hospital, NYU Langone, the nearest emergency room. No record of a woman matching her description. He hired private security, asked them to check neighborhood surveillance cameras, and drove through the streets near Helen's apartment, his eyes fixed on the sidewalks, searching for any sign of the short, white-haired woman who had raised him alone after his father's premature death. The hours dragged on with cruel slowness. Robert searched parks, bakeries, pharmacies, anywhere his mother might have gone. He spoke with doormen, night security guards, shop owners. No one had seen her. It was as if Helen had been swallowed by the metropolis, absorbed by the concrete and chaos of the city that never sleeps. With every passing minute, the guilt grew heavier, more suffocating. He should have noticed something was wrong. He should have paid more attention to the small signs his mother had been showing in recent months. Occasional forgetfulness, confusion with dates, that slightly lost look in her eyes when they spoke on the phone. When the sky began to lighten, bringing a grey, cold dawn, Robert was exhausted and desperate. He had covered half of the Upper West Side, shown his mother's photo to dozens of people, contacted the police, and mobilized a private search team. But there was nothing. No clues, no trail, no concrete information. It was Roger, one of the security guards he'd hired, who finally brought news. A camera from a shipping company in an industrial part of Bushwick, Brooklyn, had captured the image of an elderly woman walking alone down Willoughby Avenue around 10 o'clock the previous morning. The description matched. Robert felt a mix of relief and dread. Bushwick was miles away from Helen's home. What could she have been doing there? He headed to the area, his heart pounding. Bushwick, known for its street art and converted warehouses, was waking up to another busy day. But Robert paid no attention to the storefronts or the merchants opening their doors. His eyes scanned every corner, every alley, every person who passed by. He showed his mother's photo to shopkeepers, asked them to check their cameras, and questioned homeless people who were beginning to stir from under the awnings where they had spent the night. It was a man carrying boxes of merchandise who pointed to a more remote area near a set of abandoned industrial warehouses. Robert followed the direction, his stomach churning with anxiety. The area was bleak, with old grimy buildings, graffiti-covered walls, and cracked sidewalks. It was not the kind of place his mother should ever be. And then he saw her. Helen was sitting on the cold cement ground, leaning against a peeling wall, her gaze vacant and distant. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, a disheveled young man with an unshaven beard and tattered clothes had draped his own denim jacket over the elderly woman's shoulders, trying to shield her from the biting chill of the morning. The young man was no older than 25, with a thin face but defined features, and brown eyes that showed a kindness that contrasted with the harshness of the surroundings. Robert ran to them, his heart exploding in his chest. He knelt beside his mother and held her cold hands. Helen looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to remember who this man in a wrinkled suit with tired red eyes was. Then slowly a faint smile appeared on her face. "Honey," she murmured, her voice weak and confused. "Where are we?" Robert felt hot tears roll down his face. He held his mother tightly, feeling the fragility of the body that had once been so strong, so present, so full of energy to raise him alone after it was just the two of them. As he hugged her, his eyes met those of the young man, who stood respectfully a few steps away. "You found her?" Robert asked, his voice thick with emotion. The young man nodded, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his ripped jeans. "She was wandering around here yesterday afternoon, looked lost. I tried to ask if she needed help, but she couldn't tell me where she lived. She was cold, confused. Figured I'd better stay with her, you know? Make sure nothing bad happened. I was here all night waiting for sunrise to try and get some help." Robert stood up, still holding his mother's arm, and looked at the young man with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "You stayed here all night in the cold?" The young man shrugged as if it were nothing. "I'm used to the cold. She's not. Couldn't just leave her alone like that." Robert pulled his wallet from the inner pocket of his suit jacket with trembling hands. "Let me give you something at least. You have no idea how much—" The young man held up a hand, politely refusing. "No need, sir. I just did what anyone would do. Your mom's okay. That's what matters." "But not everyone would do this," Robert insisted, his voice trembling. "Most people would have just walked by. You saved my mother." The young man looked down, seeming uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did the right thing. Now that you've found her, you can get her to a doctor. She needs professional help." "What's your name?" Robert asked, putting his wallet away but memorizing every detail of that face. "Gabriel. Gabriel Davis." Robert extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Gabriel shook it. That simple handshake would, without either of them knowing it yet, seal a connection that would change all of their lives forever. "I'm going to find a way to thank you properly, Gabriel. I promise." The young man just nodded and started to walk away, but before he could leave, Helen grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Don't go," she said, her voice suddenly clear and firm. "You're a good boy. Don't go." Gabriel looked at her with tenderness and held the old woman's wrinkled hand. "I won't go far, Helen. I'll be around. You take good care of her, okay?" Robert led his mother to the car, settled her carefully in the back seat, and drove straight to the hospital. Throughout the entire drive, Helen remained silent, looking out the window with that distant expression that broke Robert's heart. He called Maria to let her know he'd found her boss and was on his way to the hospital, asking her to bring clean clothes and Helen's medical records. At Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper East Side, a medical team was already waiting. Robert had used his connections during the drive, ensuring his mother would receive immediate attention. While the doctors examined her, he stayed in the waiting room, unable to sit, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The white walls, the smell of disinfectant, the muffled sounds of machines and conversations in the hallway, it all amplified his anguish. There were 3 hours of tests: an MRI, a CT scan, a complete neurological evaluation, blood work. When the neurologist finally came to talk to him, Robert felt his legs weaken. He sat down in one of the upholstered chairs in the private room they had provided for him. Dr. Michael Evans was in his 50s, with graying hair and a serious but kind expression. He sat in the chair next to Robert and placed a folder with the test results on his lap. "Mr. Miller, I have the results here. Your mother is showing clear signs of early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The imaging scans show atrophy in specific regions of the brain consistent with the disease. The episodes of confusion, spatial disorientation, and recent memory loss you described are all classic symptoms." Robert closed his eyes, letting the information sink in slowly. Deep down, he already knew. The signs had been there in their last few phone calls, in that lost look in his mother's eyes when he'd visited her weeks ago. But hearing the diagnosis spoken aloud made it all terribly real and final. "What's the prognosis?" he managed to ask. Dr. Evans sighed. "Alzheimer's is a progressive disease. There's no cure, but we can significantly slow its progression with the right medication, constant monitoring, and, most importantly, emotional care. Your mother needs a structured routine, familiar environments, and above all, the constant presence of people she recognizes and trusts. Family support makes all the difference in the quality of life for these patients." Every word was a stab to Robert's conscience. Constant presence, family support. Exactly what he hadn't provided in recent years, too busy building his corporate empire, while the only person who truly mattered withered away in solitude. "I'll take care of her," Robert said, more to himself than to the doctor. "I'll reorganize everything. She'll have everything she needs." In the following weeks, Robert transformed Helen's life. He hired a team of professional caregivers who worked in 12-hour shifts. He installed discreet monitoring cameras throughout the apartment, not out of mistrust but for safety. He put special locks on the doors, adapted the bathroom with grab bars and non-slip flooring, and labeled cabinets and rooms with words and pictures to help with orientation. He cut back his workload for the first time in 2 decades, delegated responsibilities, and started leaving the office promptly at 6:00 p.m. to have dinner with his mother. But despite all the care, all the professional structure, all the resources his money could buy, something was missing. Helen was apathetic, distant. She took her medication without complaint, allowed them to bathe and dress her, and ate what was served, but her eyes remained vacant as if she were only physically present. Robert talked to her every night, trying to retrieve memories, telling stories from his childhood, showing old photos. But the connection he so desperately sought seemed further and further away. It was as if an invisible wall stood between mother and son, built brick by brick over his years of absence. Then, 3 weeks after the first disappearance, it happened again. Robert was in a meeting with Japanese investors when he got the call from Sandra, one of the caregivers. Helen had disappeared again. She had slipped out of the apartment while Sandra was changing the bed linens in the bedroom. The front door had been unlocked for less than 5 minutes, but it was enough time. Robert apologized to the investors, left the meeting midway and ran out. This time he knew where to go. He drove straight to Bushwick, to that same abandoned industrial area where he had found her the first time. And there she was, sitting in the exact same spot, by the same peeling wall. And beside her, as if he were a guardian appointed by some higher power, was Gabriel, once again using his jacket to warm the elderly woman. When Robert got out of the car, Gabriel looked up and, for the first time, offered a small smile. "She came back," he said simply. Helen, upon seeing Gabriel, had a reaction that left Robert speechless. Her eyes lit up, a wide, genuine smile spread across her face, and she held the young man's hand with a strength she hadn't shown in weeks. "My boy is here," she said, her voice clear and happy. "I knew you'd come." Robert watched the scene with a mix of gratitude and something that felt painfully like envy. His mother recognized Gabriel. She trusted him. She felt safe with him. And all this after just a few hours of interaction, while he, her biological son, had been struggling for weeks to build a connection that seemed increasingly impossible. "You need to install a better security system," Gabriel commented, as he helped Helen to her feet. "She'll keep coming here if she can get out." "I know," Robert replied, running a hand over his face in a gesture of exhaustion. "I don't know what else to do. She has the best caregivers, the best setup, everything money can buy. But nothing seems to be working." Gabriel looked at Helen with a tenderness that deeply touched Robert. "Maybe it's not about money or setups. Maybe she just needs someone who understands her, someone who just sits with her without trying to fix her." Those simple words resonated with Robert like a bell. He realized then that all his efforts, all the money invested, all the structure he had built, it was all his way of compensating for years of absence, of trying to solve the problem as if it were just another business challenge. But his mother didn't need solutions. She needed presence, connection, genuine affection. An idea began to form in Robert's mind. It was risky, unconventional, and would certainly generate comments and judgment from those who knew him. But looking at that scene, at his mother smiling beside a complete stranger while barely recognizing him, he knew what he had to do. "Gabriel, do you have a place to stay?" Robert asked suddenly. The young man hesitated before answering. "I get by. There are some spots around here that—" "No," Robert interrupted. "I mean a home, a permanent place. Do you have a job?" Gabriel looked down. "I used to, before life got complicated, but it's been a while." Robert took a deep breath. He was about to make an offer that would change everything. "I want to offer you a job, at my company. Nothing too complicated at first, just to help you get settled, a fair salary, full benefits, and I want you to spend a few hours a day with my mother, not as a professional caregiver, but as a friend, a companion. She trusts you in a way she doesn't trust anyone else." Gabriel's eyes widened, clearly shocked. "Sir, I don't know if—" "You don't have to answer me now," Robert continued. "Think about it, but the offer is serious. You gave me back the most important thing in my life. Let me give you a chance to restart yours." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Gabriel looked at Helen, who was still holding his hand, then at Robert, and finally at the dirty cement ground where he had spent 2 nights protecting a stranger. "I accept," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "But on one condition. I want to be treated like any other employee. I don't want privileges or special treatment because of your mother. I want to earn my place through my work." Robert extended his hand, and the two shook on it once more. That handshake sealed an agreement that went far beyond a simple employment contract. It was the beginning of a journey, of redemption, healing and transformation that neither of them could have foreseen. As he led his mother back to the car, with Gabriel following a few steps behind, Robert looked up at the grey New York sky and, for the first time in a long time, felt something like hope. Perhaps the universe had placed Gabriel in Helen's path precisely to teach them all a lesson that money couldn't buy, that true wealth lay in the ability to care, to be concerned, to be present for those in need. And so, as the metropolis continued its frantic pace around them, 3 lives were about to intertwine, in ways none of them could imagine, guided by the invisible thread of compassion, second chances, and the love that blossoms in the most unlikely of places. Gabriel spent the first night in a modest hotel in downtown Manhattan that Robert insisted on paying for. It was a simple room, but for someone who had slept on park benches and under overpasses for the past few years, the bed with clean sheets and a hot shower felt like absolute luxury. Lying in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling, Gabriel still couldn't believe the turn his life had taken in a matter of days. He hadn't told Robert, but on that cold night when he found Helen wandering and lost, Gabriel was at one of the darkest points in his existence. He had thought about giving up, about simply letting himself be carried away by the aimless current of his life. But then he saw that confused old woman, shivering from the cold, completely vulnerable, and something inside him awakened, a spark of humanity he thought he had lost along with everything else. Taking care of her that night had saved them both, in different ways. The next morning, Gabriel took the longest shower of his life, letting the hot water wash away not just the dirt, but also some of the shame and weight he carried. When he looked at himself in the fogged-up mirror, he barely recognized his own face beneath the patchy beard. Robert had left cash and a note with instructions to buy clothes suitable for work. Nothing too expensive or flashy, just the basics: slacks, button-down shirts, a decent pair of shoes. Walking through a department store on Canal Street was a strange experience. The salespeople watched him with suspicion, likely used to dealing with petty theft in the area. Gabriel quickly grabbed what he needed, paid in cash, and left before anyone could question his presence there. Afterward, he found a simple barber shop where an old Italian man skillfully trimmed his beard and cut his hair, all with friendly conversation. When he was done, Gabriel hardly recognized himself. The man in the mirror looked years younger, with defined features and brown eyes that, despite their weariness, still held a glimmer of determination. Robert was waiting for him in the lobby of Miller & Associates at 9 o'clock sharp. The building on Madison Avenue was imposing, all mirrored glass with a vertical garden on its facade that impressed visitors. Gabriel felt his stomach churn as he entered a world that had once been familiar but now seemed as distant as the moon. "I'll introduce you as Gabriel Davis, a new hire in the facilities department," Robert explained as they rode up in the mirrored elevator. "You'll start by assisting with building maintenance management for our properties. Nothing too technical at first, just shadowing the teams, writing basic reports, that sort of thing. The important thing is for you to get acclimated." Gabriel just nodded, trying to control the anxiety that made his heart race. How many years had it been since he'd worn dress clothes and stepped into a corporate environment? 4, 5. It felt like an eternity. The director of facilities, a stern man named Paul Harris, received him with professional courtesy, but Gabriel noticed the analytical gaze, trying to figure out where this employee, who was clearly a direct hire from the company's owner, had come from. For the first few days, Gabriel kept his head down, spoke little, and observed a lot. He did exactly as he was told. Always arrived before his shift started and left after everyone else had gone home. But the whispers didn't take long to start. In the shared kitchen, in the hallway, in the elevator, speculation about who this guy was, who had appeared out of nowhere and had direct access to Robert Miller. Some said he was a distant relative who had fallen on hard times. Others whispered he was the businessman's illegitimate son. Gossip was inevitable in any corporate setting, and Gabriel had learned long ago to ignore what others thought of him. There was, however, one person who treated him with genuine, respectful curiosity. Beatrice B. Scott was the Social Projects Coordinator, a small and often overlooked department within the company's structure. She was 30, with curly hair always tied up in a practical bun, sharp eyes behind red-framed glasses, and a smile that could light up any room. Unlike the others, B didn't ask invasive questions. She just offered help when she saw Gabriel struggling with a system or procedure. "Have you worked with spreadsheets before?" she asked one afternoon, finding him stuck in front of an Excel screen. "I have, a long time ago," Gabriel admitted, feeling his face flush. "But I think I've forgotten half the formulas." B pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "Let me show you some shortcuts. They make it a lot easier." For the next 20 minutes, she patiently taught him, without a hint of condescension. Gabriel realized she had that rare gift of making people feel at ease, as if making a mistake wasn't shameful, just part of the learning process. "Thanks," he said, when he finally got the spreadsheet to work. "You saved my day." B smiled. "No problem. By the way, if you need anything, my office is at the end of the hall. The door's always open." During breaks from work, Robert would take Gabriel to visit Helen. The apartment on the Upper East Side was spacious and filled with light, with antique furniture that told decades of stories. The old woman greeted Gabriel with a joy that starkly contrasted with her apathy toward the professional caregivers. Her eyes would light up, she would hold his hands, and she would talk about things that sometimes made sense and sometimes didn't, but always with a genuine affection that touched Gabriel's heart. "You came back, my boy," she would say every time. I knew you'd be back. Robert observed these interactions with a complex feeling that took him days to identify as gratitude mixed with a pang of pain. His mother had found something in Gabriel that he, her real son, couldn't offer. But instead of resenting it, Robert began to learn. He watched how Gabriel sat beside Helen without rushing, how he held her hand gently, how he let her guide the conversations without trying to correct her or bring her back to reality when she drifted. One afternoon, while Helen was napping in her armchair after a long chat with Gabriel, Robert called him out to the back garden. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Robert began, choosing his words carefully. Gabriel tensed slightly, but nodded. "What happened to you? How did you end up on the streets?" Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the rose bushes Helen had cultivated for decades. Robert was about to say he didn't have to answer when Gabriel finally spoke. "I was studying architecture at Columbia. I was on a scholarship, came from a simple family in Albany. My parents were blue-collar workers, worked hard to see me through college. I was good, you know. I had high grades, even won a few awards in student design competitions. I thought I was finally going to change my life, give my parents a better one." He paused, his voice catching slightly. Robert remained silent, giving Gabriel space to continue at his own pace. "In my third year, I developed a project for sustainable social housing. It was my passion, you know, creating dignified homes for those who needed them most. I worked on it for months. It was innovative, had creative solutions to problems no one had solved yet. I showed it to a professor I really admired, asked for his guidance. He praised it, said it was exceptional." Gabriel took a deep breath. 2 months later, I found out he had presented my project at an international conference as his own. He changed a few superficial details, but the essence, the core ideas, it was all mine. When I reported him, he used all his influence at the university. He had a 40-year career, was respected, well-known. I was just a poor scholarship kid. Who were they going to believe? "And they believed him," Robert finished, his voice laced with restrained anger. "Not only did they believe him, they expelled me from the university for plagiarism. They said I had copied his work, turned the whole thing around. My scholarship was revoked, my reputation destroyed. No other university would accept me. I tried to find work, but the stain of the expulsion followed me. Doors just kept closing one by one." "And your parents?" Gabriel closed his eyes, and Robert saw the pain wash over his face like a wave. "My mom couldn't handle the disappointment, the scandal. She had a heart condition. It got much worse after all that. She passed away 6 months after the expulsion. My dad was devastated, started drinking heavily. A year later, he had an accident at work. He was gone too." "I'm so sorry," Robert said, and he truly was. He now understood the depth of Gabriel's fall, the brutal sequence of losses that had led him to the streets. "I was left alone, with no family, no degree, no references, nothing. I tried to start over, but life just got harder and harder. I lost the apartment I shared with other students, then the temp job I'd managed to get, then another and another. It was a downward spiral. Before I knew it, I was sleeping in shelters. Then I couldn't even get into the shelters. That's when I started living on the streets for real." "And you never once thought about getting revenge on that professor? About exposing the truth?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. Gabriel gave a sad smile. "I thought about it. A lot. I planned 1,000 ways to destroy his career like he destroyed mine. But then I realized it wouldn't bring my mom back, it wouldn't bring my dad back to life. It wouldn't give me back the years I lost. Revenge would just turn me into someone as bad as he was. So I chose to let it go, to move on, or at least try to." That conversation changed something in Robert. He began to see Gabriel not just as the man who had saved his mother, but as someone who had survived unimaginable loss and still kept his humanity intact. There was a strength in that kindness, a courage in the choice not to become bitter. In the following weeks, Gabriel began to excel at work. His background in architecture, though incomplete, gave him a unique understanding of the projects and building maintenance needs. He identified problems others had overlooked, suggested improvements that saved money, and prepared reports so detailed and well-structured that they caught Paul Harris's attention. "This kid is good," the director commented to Robert one morning. Very good. He has a different perspective, an analytical ability that's above average. Where did you say you found him? Robert smiled enigmatically. Let's just say he was in the right place at the right time. With his first paycheck, Gabriel rented a small apartment in Astoria, Queens. It was a simple one-bedroom with old furniture left by the previous tenant, but it had a window that faced the sunrise, and it was his. For the first time in years, Gabriel had an address, a place he could call home. He cried alone that first night, lying on the thin mattress looking at the stained ceiling, feeling the weight of gratitude and the responsibility not to waste this chance. He started to get his documents in order. He went to the DMV to get a replacement ID, opened a bank account, and got his social security number. Sorted out. Each step was a reclamation of his civil identity, of his place in the world as a citizen, not an invisible person dwelling in the city's shadows. B helped him buy better clothes, recommended a dentist who offered affordable treatment, and lent him books on project management she thought he would like. Gradually, a genuine friendship formed between them. She didn't ask about his past, but made it clear she was there if he ever needed to talk. You have a gift with people, she commented once during lunch in the building's food court. Have you noticed how the maintenance staff respects you? They don't listen to just anyone, but they listen to you. Gabriel shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. I guess it's because I treat them with respect, as equals. Exactly, Bea replied, biting into her turkey sandwich. Most people here treat them like they're invisible. You don't. They notice that. While Gabriel was rebuilding his professional life, his relationship with Helen deepened in unexpected ways. He visited her daily, sometimes before work, sometimes during his lunch break, and always at the end of the day. He brought her flowers he bought from street vendors, cheap chocolates she loved, and old photos she enjoyed looking at. Tell me the story again about when your son was a little boy, she would often ask, and Gabriel would tell the stories Robert had shared with him, about the mischievous boy who wanted to be an astronaut, who collected toy cars, who climbed the trees in the backyard and made his mother worry. Helen would smile, sometimes remembering details, sometimes inventing new ones, but always with that expression of pure happiness. Robert watched all of this with a mix of emotions. He had learned to swallow his pride and accept that Gabriel could reach his mother in ways he couldn't. But instead of pulling away, Robert started spending more time with both of them, learning from Gabriel the art of genuine presence, of affection without expectations, of the silent companionship that was sometimes worth more than 1,000 words. Slowly, something began to change in Robert too. The man who had always rushed from meeting to meeting, who answered emails late into the night, who saw work as the only measure of success, began to slow down. He delegated more responsibilities to his team of directors, learned to say no to commitments he once thought were indispensable, and started leaving the office at 6 p.m. to have dinner with Helen and Gabriel. On the nights the three of them had dinner together in the Upper East Side apartment, with Helen presiding at the head of the table even when she was confused about the day of the week, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than profits and contracts. It was an imperfect family, built on unusual circumstances, but it was real. Marianne, Robert's executive assistant, noticed the changes. You're different, she commented one morning as she brought him his coffee. Lighter, more present. Robert smiled. I'm learning there are more important things than what shows up on a spreadsheet. But not all days were peaceful. An incident at the company almost cost Gabriel his job. One of the senior managers, Richard Foster, an arrogant man who saw Gabriel's rise as a threat, started spreading rumors that he was receiving preferential treatment, that he didn't deserve to be there, that he was just the boss's pet project. One afternoon, during a meeting with suppliers, Richard deliberately asked for Gabriel's opinion on a complex technical issue, expecting him to be unable to answer. To everyone's surprise, Gabriel not only answered with expertise, but also identified a flaw in the project that everyone else had missed. The room fell silent. Richard turned pale. After the meeting, Richard followed him into the hallway. You might fool the others with your little sob story turned hero act, but I know who you really are, an opportunist who took advantage of a situation. Gabriel took a deep breath, fighting the urge to respond in kind. You don't know me, and you don't have to. Like me. I just have to do my job well. You can be sure I'll be watching for every mistake you make, Richard threatened before walking away. That night, Gabriel arrived at his apartment emotionally exhausted. For a moment, the old feeling of being judged, of carrying an invisible weight he could never shake, returned with full force. He sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, questioning if he was right to accept this opportunity, if he wasn't just postponing an inevitable failure. The phone rang. It was B. I heard what happened today. Richard is like that with anyone he feels might outshine him. Don't give up because of that jerk, okay? You deserve to be here. Your work speaks for itself. Thanks, B, Gabriel said, using the nickname she preferred. I needed to hear that. Tomorrow, we'll have lunch, and I'll tell you some horrible stories about Richard that will make you laugh, she promised. And she did exactly that. The next day at lunch, B made him laugh with stories of Richard's professional blunders, his tantrums in meetings, and how everyone tolerated him only because of his seniority. Gabriel felt better, lighter, reminded that he wasn't alone on this journey. But it was Helen who, in her clouded wisdom, gave him the most important perspective. One afternoon, when Gabriel was particularly down, she held his hand and said with surprising lucidity, My boy, it doesn't matter what other people say. What matters is what you know about yourself. You have a good heart, and no one can take that away from you. Those simple words touched Gabriel deeply. Helen, in her moments of confusion, could see truths that many in full command of their faculties could not. He realized he had spent years letting others' opinions define his worth, first at the university, then on the streets. It was time to start defining it for himself. 2 weeks later, Richard made a serious mistake in a contract with a major supplier. It was Gabriel who identified the problem in time to correct it, before it caused significant financial damage. When Paul Harris asked why he hadn't let the mistake slide, since Richard was his adversary, Gabriel replied simply, Because I don't work against anyone. I work for the company. That attitude reached Robert's ears, and he called Gabriel into his office. Sitting behind the mahogany desk, the businessman looked at him with an expression Gabriel couldn't decipher. You continue to surprise me. Richard has been making your life a living hell, and yet you saved him from a disaster. Gabriel shrugged. Letting him fail wouldn't have made me a better person. It would have just made me as small as he is. Robert got up and went to the window, looking out at the city below. You know, I built all of this, he said, gesturing to the skyline, with a philosophy of ruthless competition. Crush the competition, show no mercy, win. At all costs. I thought that was strength, but you're showing me there's a much greater strength in having integrity. I don't know if I'm a model of integrity, Gabriel replied. I just know I don't want to be defined by the worst thing that happened to me. I want to be defined by how I choose to react. Robert sat back down, his eyes welling up with an emotion he no longer hid. My mother chose to trust you on that cold day in Bushwick. It was the best choice she ever made, because you didn't just save her. You're saving both of us. That night, the three of them had dinner together again. Helen was particularly lucid, telling stories from her youth about raising Robert alone, about how difficult but also rewarding it was. Gabriel and Robert listened in respectful silence, each with their own reflections on family, loss, and rebuilding. When Gabriel finally left, it was almost midnight. On his way home, walking through the illuminated streets of New York, he looked up at the stars that stubbornly shone despite the city's light pollution, and allowed himself for the first time in a long time to feel something like happiness. His life was still far from perfect. There were challenges ahead, wounds that still needed to heal, fears that still haunted him in the early hours of the morning. But there was also hope, a new family that had embraced him, and a purpose that was beginning to take shape on the horizon. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Gabriel Davis allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. Spring arrived in New York, bringing flowering cherry trees and a lighter air that contrasted with the grey winter left. Behind. Gabriel was completing 6 months at Miller and Associates, and his transformation was remarkable. He was no longer the lost, insecure man who had timidly entered the office. He walked with the upright posture of someone who had reclaimed his dignity, spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his subject, and smiled with the ease of someone beginning to make peace with the past. Paul Harris had promoted him to facilities coordinator, a position that came with more responsibilities and a salary that allowed Gabriel not only to pay his bills, but also to start saving a little money. He had bought new furniture for his apartment, enrolled in a night course on project management, and even managed to buy a reliable used car that made his commute around the city easier. But the biggest change wasn't material. It was internal. Gabriel had started dreaming about the future again, something he hadn't done in years. He thought about going back to study architecture, maybe one day having his own firm, creating projects that made a difference in people's lives. They were still modest dreams, whispered only in his thoughts, but they were there, sprouting like the cherry blossoms. That heralded better days. Helen was also showing a surprising recovery. Dr. Evans didn't hide his astonishment during the monthly checkups. Although the Alzheimer's had no cure and was still present, the disease's progression seemed to have slowed significantly. The elderly woman had more and more lucid moments, periods when she spoke clearly about the present, made jokes, and showed genuine interest in Gabriel's and Robert's lives. "It's the affection," the doctor had explained at the last appointment. "Studies show that Alzheimer's patients who receive constant love, who have strong emotional bonds, tend to have a much better quality of life. Helen is surrounded by people who truly love her. That makes all the difference." Robert knew that Gabriel was an essential part of that improvement. The connection between the young man and his mother was something that transcended rational explanation. There was a pure affection there, without ulterior motives, without the weight of guilt or expectations. Helen called Gabriel "my boy," and he called her "my Helen," and in those simple nicknames there was a world of tenderness. Robert himself was different. His business friends commented on the change. He smiled more, was less tense, attended fewer empty social events, and dedicated more time to projects that truly mattered. He had started to take an interest in social responsibility initiatives, something he had previously seen only as a marketing strategy. Now he saw it as a genuine purpose. It was on one of those golden September afternoons, when the New York autumn was at its best, that everything changed again. Robert had a meeting scheduled with Mark Taylor, an old business partner he hadn't seen in a few years. Mark owned a mid-sized construction company and was interested in discussing a potential partnership for a development in the South Bronx. Gabriel was in Robert's office reviewing some contracts when Mark arrived, tall with neatly combed grey hair, an impeccable suit, and a smile that showed artificially whitened teeth. He greeted Robert with a firm handshake and looked around the office with approval. "Robert, my friend, you just keep growing. Impressive." "We're trying to do our best," Robert replied diplomatically. "Oh, this is Gabriel Davis, my facilities coordinator. Gabriel, Mark Taylor." Gabriel extended his hand politely, but the moment his eyes met Mark's, he felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in that look, a recognition that made him instinctively recoil. Mark in turn shook Gabriel's hand with excessive force, his smile widening in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Gabriel Davis," Mark repeated, as if savoring the name. "That name sounds familiar. Very familiar." Gabriel felt his blood run cold. No, it couldn't be. Of all the people in New York, of all the businessmen Robert could know, it had to be him. The universe was playing a cruel joke. Mark continued to stare at Gabriel with that smile that now seemed more like a mask. "Wait, I remember you. Columbia, right? School of Architecture. You were that student who got expelled for plagiarism about 5 years ago. That's you, isn't it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked from Mark to Gabriel, confused. Gabriel stood motionless, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. All the years of rebuilding, all the dignity he had worked so hard to recover, seemed threatened by those accusatory words. Mark laughed, a humorless sound. "Robert, are you aware you hired someone who was expelled from the university? Who was exposed as a plagiarist? Man, the scandal was huge at the time, I remember, because I was on the department's advisory board, part of the committee that decided on his expulsion. Those last words hit Gabriel like a punch to the gut. Mark wasn't just someone who knew the story. He had been an active part in the destruction of his life. One of those who had sat at that table, listened to the fabricated accusations, and decided to end his dreams without even investigating the truth. Robert stood up, his expression hardening. "Mark, I think you should leave now. This meeting is over." "But why?" Mark feigned surprise. "I'm just looking out for you." "My friend, are you sure you want someone with that record in your business? Think about the company's reputation." "I said, get out," Robert repeated, his voice low but filled with authority. "Now." Mark raised his hands in mock surrender. "As you wish. But when the problems start, don't say I didn't warn you." And turning to Gabriel, he added venomously, "Some mistakes follow you forever, kid. You should know that." When the door closed behind Mark, silence once again filled the room. Gabriel stood in the same spot, staring at the floor, his shoulders tense. Robert approached him, but didn't know what to say. He knew the story, knew the accusation was false, but seeing the weight of that shame on Gabriel made him both furious and helpless. "I'm sorry," Gabriel finally said, his voice weak. "I should have told you he was on the committee, but I swear I didn't know you two knew each other." "You have nothing to apologize for," Robert replied firmly. "Nothing. That man is a fool who clearly enjoys humiliating others to feel powerful, and he will never set foot in this company again. But he's right about one thing, this will always follow me. No matter how hard I work, how much I try, there will always be someone to remember, to judge." "No," Robert said, grabbing Gabriel by the shoulders and forcing him to look him in the eye. "It will only follow you if you let it, and I won't let it. We're going to prove you were wronged. We're going to clear your name." "How?" Gabriel asked, hopeless. "It's been 5 years. The people involved have moved on. No one will want to dig this up." "I will," Robert declared. "And I have the resources, the contacts, the lawyers. If you let me, I'll investigate everything. Find proof, witnesses, anything that shows the truth. You deserve to have your life back completely, Gabriel, not just a piece of it." Gabriel felt his eyes burn. For all those years, no one had fought for him. No one had believed his side of the story. And now here was Robert, offering to mobilize all his power and influence to right an injustice that wasn't even his responsibility. "Why would you do this for me?" Gabriel asked, genuinely confused. Robert smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Because you gave me my mother back. Because you taught me what really matters in life. And because, Gabriel, you are the person with the most integrity I know. I will not let your past be defined by a coward's lie." That night, Robert began to mobilize his team. He hired the best lawyers specializing in academic cases, private investigators to look into the professor who had stolen Gabriel's project, and investigative journalists to dissect the case. What had started as a gesture of loyalty quickly turned into a personal mission. Robert wanted justice not just for Gabriel, but for everyone crushed by corrupt systems and unscrupulous powerful people. Over the following weeks, the investigation progressed rapidly. They discovered that Professor Ronald Fisher had a history of questionable behavior. Other former students began to come forward with similar stories of appropriated ideas, stolen credit, and academic intimidation. They found emails that proved Fisher had access to Gabriel's project before presenting it as his own. Witnesses who had remained silent at the time out of fear were now, years later, willing to speak. Gabriel followed everything with a mix of hope and dread. With each new piece of evidence, each witness who confirmed his story, he felt immense relief. But he also felt fear. Fear of reopening wounds that hadn't fully healed. Fear that in the end, even with proof, no one would care. Bea was a crucial support during this period. She had started spending more time with Gabriel, lunches that stretched on, conversations that went beyond the professional. A connection was growing between them, an attraction they both felt, but neither had yet verbalized. Gabriel was afraid to open up emotionally, to let someone into what was left of his bruised heart. But Bea was patient, understanding, and didn't push. It was she who suggested that Gabriel get back into volunteer work while the investigation was ongoing. "You need to do something that connects you with your original purpose," she said. "Remember why you wanted to be an architect. To help people. Don't let this whole thing make you forget that." Gabriel started working on weekends at a shelter on the Lower East Side that supported the homeless. Ironically, being there with people living the reality he knew so well brought a strange peace. He could help, guide, and offer a little of the hope that Robert had given him. It was at the shelter that he met Lucy Andrews. She was a social worker, 30 years old, with dark hair always tied back in a practical ponytail and intense green eyes that seemed to see right through people. Lucy was passionate about her work, dedicating herself fervently to each case, fighting bureaucracy, mobilizing resources, and never resting until she had truly helped. "You've been on the streets," Gabriel stated the second time they met, not as a question, but as a fact. Lucy didn't deny it. "From 12 to 15. My mom was an addict. My dad disappeared when I was a baby. I lived in shelters on the streets until a social worker rescued me. She literally saved my life. That's why I do what I do. It's my way of paying it forward." Gabriel felt an immediate connection. Here was someone who understood, who knew the specific pain of being invisible to society. They started talking more, sharing experiences, developing projects together at the shelter, and slowly, something more began to blossom between them. Meanwhile, Robert finally gathered enough evidence. He had documents, emails, testimonies from at least 6 former students, and a forensic analysis showing the original project was Gabriel's. He was ready to publicly destroy Professor Ronald Fisher, to expose the scandal in the media, to sue the university for the injustice committed. He scheduled a meeting with Gabriel to present everything he had found. He spread the documents across his office desk, his eyes shining with the adrenaline of someone about to win an important battle. "We have everything, Gabriel, everything. We can ruin him, expose the truth, clear your name completely. He'll lose his professorship, his reputation, maybe even face criminal charges. Justice will finally be served." Gabriel looked at the papers, at the proof of his innocence, at the opportunity for revenge he would have given anything for years ago. And he felt empty. There was no joy in the prospect of destruction, only a deep weariness. "What if I asked you not to do anything with this?" Gabriel asked quietly. Robert stopped organizing the papers and stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Gabriel, this is your redemption, your chance to show the world you were wronged." "But will it bring my parents back?" Gabriel asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Will it give me back the 5 years I lost? Will it erase the cold nights, the hunger, the humiliation?" "No, but then what really changes?" Gabriel interrupted. "I destroy this man, and then what? I feel better. For how long? A week? A month? And then? Does the bitterness go away, or does it just grow?" Robert sat down, stunned. "But he deserves to pay for what he did." "Yes, he does. But I don't want to be the instrument of that punishment. I've carried enough weight on my shoulders, Robert. Hate, resentment, the desire for revenge. All of it just made me heavier, more trapped in that past. I've found a way to move forward. I have a job that gives me dignity, a new family in you and Helen. I've met incredible people like Bea and Lucy. I have a life again. Why would I throw all that away for revenge?" "But it's not just revenge," Robert argued. "It's justice. It's making sure he doesn't do this to anyone else." Gabriel picked up one of the papers, a copy of the email proving the intellectual theft. "You can use this evidence to file an anonymous complaint with the university. Let them open an internal investigation. Let them take the appropriate action. But I don't want to be publicly involved. I don't want my rebuilding to be about tearing someone down. I want it to be about lifting myself up. There's a difference." Robert ran a hand over his face, struggling to understand. "Are you sure about this after everything?" "I am," Gabriel answered with conviction. "And you know why? Because I learned something over all these years. True strength isn't in winning battles. It's in choosing which battles are worth fighting. And this one isn't worth it anymore. I already won when I chose to start over. When I chose not to let what he did define who I am." Those words impacted Robert in a way he hadn't expected. Here was a man who had every reason in the world to be bitter, vengeful, cruel, who held in his hands the perfect opportunity to destroy the one who had destroyed him. And he chose forgiveness, not out of weakness but out of strength, out of wisdom, out of understanding that some burdens simply aren't worth carrying. "You're a better person than I am," Robert said, his voice trembling. I would have crushed him without a second thought. "It's not about being better or worse. It's about choosing what kind of person I want to be from now on, and I choose to be someone who leaves the past in the past." That night, Robert did as Gabriel asked. He sent a complete dossier to Columbia University's Ethics Committee, anonymously, with all the evidence he had gathered. He didn't mention Gabriel's name, just presented the facts and let the institution take the appropriate measures. Weeks later, it was discreetly leaked to the press that Professor Ronald Fisher was under investigation for academic misconduct. His reputation began to crumble, but away from the spotlight, without a public scandal. Gabriel followed it all from a distance with a tranquility he didn't know he possessed. He felt sorry for the professor, which surprised him. Sorry for a life wasted building a career on lies, for an old age that would be marked by disgrace. But he felt no satisfaction, just a quiet closure, like gently closing the door to a room you no longer inhabit. Gabriel's choice to forgive changed something fundamental in Robert. He began to rethink his entire philosophy of business, of life. He had always believed that success was about dominating, winning, subjugating the competition. But Gabriel had shown him that there was a much greater power in mercy, in the ability to choose peace when you have the strength for war. Helen, in one of her moments of stunning lucidity, summed it all up in a sentence that would be etched in both their hearts. She was sitting in the garden, with Gabriel and Robert on either side, when she said, "Forgiveness isn't a gift we give to those who hurt us. It's a gift we give to ourselves. It's the choice not to let the past steal our future." The two men looked at each other, amazed by the wisdom of this woman whom the disease should have diminished, but instead seemed to have revealed her deepest essence. As autumn approached, bringing golden leaves and a mild chill, the lives of the three continued their transformation. Gabriel enrolled in a private university to resume his architecture degree, now paying for it himself with the money he had saved. He worked during the day, studied 3 nights a week, still dedicated time to volunteering at the shelter, and of course visited Helen whenever he could. He and Lucy started dating officially. It was a relationship built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose. She knew his demons because she had her own. He understood her struggles because he had fought similar battles. Together, they were stronger, more complete. B celebrated their relationship with genuine joy, without a trace of jealousy, which confirmed to Gabriel that their friendship was exactly that, pure and true. She and Lucy quickly became friends, united by the affection they both felt for Gabriel and their shared commitment to social causes. Robert also found love in an unexpected way. He met Dr. Patricia Allen, a volunteer doctor at the shelter where Gabriel worked, during a visit to see the project. She was 40, a widow, and dedicated her weekends to providing free medical care to vulnerable people. There was a practical kindness in her, without empty romanticism, that deeply touched Robert. They started seeing each other, first in professional contexts, discussing how Miller and Associates could further support the shelter's work, then at dinners that felt less and less like business meetings and more like romantic dates. Patricia wasn't impressed by Robert's money. She was impressed by his changes, by his genuine desire to make a difference. "Look at you," Gabriel teased one afternoon, seeing Robert leave the office early to meet Patricia. "Leaving work at 5. I never thought I'd see the day." Robert laughed. "You taught me there are more important things than spreadsheets and meetings. And you taught me there are still good people in the world willing to help a stranger," Gabriel replied seriously. The two men hugged, a hug of brothers, of friends, of souls who had saved each other without even realizing it. Helen watched it all with a serene smile. Her memory often failed her. She forgot names and dates. Sometimes she didn't recognize where she was. But she always recognized the love that surrounded her. And in those moments of clarity, she would look at her son and the young man she had adopted as another son, and feel a deep gratitude to be alive to witness this miracle. 2 years passed like pages turned quickly in a book whose story had finally taken a happy turn. New York City continued its frantic pace, but for that small circle of souls who had met under the most unlikely circumstances, life had transformed into something none of them had dared to dream of. Gabriel was in the final stretch of his architecture degree. His grades were exemplary, his projects caught the attention of his professors, and he had reclaimed not only his place in the academic world, but also his original passion for the profession. He continued to work at Miller & Associates during the day, study 3 nights a week, and dedicate his weekends to volunteering at the shelter on the Lower East Side. Now alongside Lucy, who had become much more than his girlfriend, she was his partner in life and purpose. The apartment in Astoria had been exchanged for a larger place in Williamsburg, a vibrant and welcoming neighborhood that matched the new chapter of their lives. Lucy had moved in 6 months ago, and together they had turned the space into a real home, with plants on the balcony, books scattered on the shelves, and photos on the walls that told the story of a collective reconstruction. Robert had also changed his way of living and working. Miller & Associates was no longer just a development company focused on profits. He had significantly redirected investments towards social housing projects, created a fund to build affordable homes for low-income families, and implemented job training programs for vulnerable individuals. The profits had decreased considerably, but the social impact had grown exponentially. Many of his old partners and investors jumped ship, critical of the new direction they considered too idealistic and not profitable enough. Robert let them go without resentment. He found new partners who shared his vision, socially conscious entrepreneurs, and impact investors who measured success not just in dollars, but in transformed lives. Patricia was always by his side, supporting every decision, bringing her medical and humanitarian perspective to the projects. They had married in an intimate ceremony in the garden of Helen's apartment, with only their closest friends and family present. The old woman was radiant that day, lucid and emotional, wearing a lilac dress Patricia had chosen especially for her. It was Helen who took Patricia's hand and symbolically gave her to Robert, saying in a firm voice, "Take good care of my boy. He has a huge heart. He just needed someone to show him how to use it right." Everyone cried at that moment, touched by the lucidity and wisdom of the woman whom the disease tried to erase, but who insisted on shining in the most important moments. Helen's improvement continued to surprise the doctors. Dr. Evans openly admitted that she was an atypical case, a statistical outlier. The Alzheimer's was still there, but its progression was so slow it seemed almost stagnant. The old woman had periods of confusion, of course, days when she got lost in her own memories, but she also had entire weeks of impressive mental clarity. "It's love," Robert would always say when someone asked. "She's surrounded by pure love, and that keeps her here with us." And it was true. Helen was the center of that improvised family. Gabriel visited her daily, sometimes just for breakfast before work, other times for long dinners where they talked about everything and nothing. Lucy visited whenever she could, bringing flowers from the farmer's market and stories from the shelter that made the old woman's eyes sparkle. Bea would show up on Sundays with homemade cakes and grand plans for social events. Patricia personally managed her health, adjusting medications, running regular checkups, ensuring every detail was perfect. It was on a rainy March afternoon, with the New York sky pouring down as if to wash the entire city, that Gabriel had the idea that would change everything once more. He was sitting in his office, watching the raindrops run down the window, when Bea walked in carrying a stack of reports on the company's social programs. "Have you seen these numbers?" she asked excitedly. "We've helped reintegrate over 200 homeless people in the last 6 months. 200 families have a roof over their heads now because of the affordable housing projects. It's incredible, Gabriel." Gabriel looked at the numbers, feeling that familiar sense of purpose that had guided him since he decided to reclaim his life. "But something's missing," he said thoughtfully. "A centralized space is missing. A place where someone can arrive and find everything they need. Temporary shelter, medical care, psychological support, job training, all integrated. A true welcome center." Bea sat in the chair across from him, her eyes shining. Are you thinking of creating a center like that? I'm thinking we should. Robert has the resources, the company has the construction expertise. You have experience in managing social projects. Lucy and Patricia can structure the services. We can do this. That same evening, Gabriel presented the idea to Robert and Patricia during dinner at Helen's apartment. Helen was particularly lucid, listening intently to every word as she ate her vegetable soup. When Gabriel finished explaining the project, she slapped her hand on the table with surprising energy. "Do it! Build that place and put my name on it!" Everyone fell silent, looking at the old woman. She smiled, that light-filled smile that could still brighten any room. "If I'm going to be remembered for anything in this life, let it be for this, for a place that helps people start over, like Gabriel started over, like we all started over." Robert felt tears roll down his face. "Mom, we're going to do it. We're going to create the Helen Miller Welcome Center, and it's going to be the best center this city has ever seen." The following months were a period of intense work. Robert bought a large plot of land near the South Bronx, an area undergoing urban revitalization close to the city center. Gabriel, who was finishing his degree, was invited to lead the architectural design as his final thesis project. It was the perfect opportunity, combining his academic training with his life's purpose. He worked day and night on the project, drawing and redrawing every detail. He wanted to create a space that was functional, but also welcoming, that didn't have the cold, institutional atmosphere of traditional shelters. He designed dignified single rooms, common areas that encouraged community, internal gardens that brought nature and peace, and counseling rooms that preserved privacy. Every inch of the project was designed with love and respect for the people who would be welcomed there. Lucy structured the social service programs, creating humanized protocols to ensure that every person was treated with dignity from the very first moment. Patricia assembled a team of volunteer doctors who would provide free care to the residents. Bea designed the job training programs in partnership with companies and educational institutions. While all this was happening, Gabriel graduated. The commencement ceremony was emotional. He stood on the stage wearing the black cap and gown, finally holding the diploma that had been stolen from him years ago. But this time was different. It wasn't just a piece of paper attesting to his knowledge. It was the symbol of a journey of fall and rebirth, of pain transformed into purpose, of a man who refused to be defined by the worst moment of his life. In the audience, sitting together in the front row, were Robert, Helen in her wheelchair, Patricia, Lucy, Bea, and even Paul Harris, his boss from Miller & Associates. When his name was called and he walked across the stage, they all stood and applauded with a force that made other graduates and their families turn to look. Gabriel waved to them, his face wet with tears of happiness, feeling that this moment wasn't just his, but belonged to everyone who had believed in him when he no longer believed in himself. After graduation, a prestigious New York architecture firm, Urban Studio, known for its socially engaged projects, made Gabriel an offer. They wanted to hire him specifically to lead their new division of social impact housing projects. The salary was generous, the opportunity was extraordinary. It was everything Gabriel had dreamed of when he first entered the university 10 years ago. He accepted, but negotiated to continue collaborating with Miller & Associates on the Helen Miller Center and other social initiatives. Robert agreed immediately, proud to see Gabriel gaining the recognition he had always deserved. The construction of the Helen Miller Welcome Center took 8 months. Gabriel personally oversaw every stage, from the foundation to the final touches. He watched his project come off the paper and become a reality in concrete, glass, and steel. It was a 3-story building with the capacity to temporarily house 50 people, complete with medical offices, counseling rooms, a library, classrooms for training courses, an industrial kitchen that would serve 3 meals a day, and internal gardens with trees and benches where people could find a bit of peace. But what made Gabriel most proud was the main entrance. He had designed a spacious, bright lobby with large windows that let in natural light, walls in warm terracotta tones, and, on the central wall, a phrase he had asked to be inscribed in large letters. "Here you are welcome. Here you are seen. Here you can begin again." The inauguration was scheduled for a sunny Saturday in November, when the New York autumn was at its peak. Hundreds of people attended, from city officials interested in the project to curious neighborhood residents, business partners, volunteers, and people who had been helped by Miller and Associates' previous programs and now had their lives back on track. But the seats of honor, in the front row of chairs set up in the center's front garden, were reserved for the small group that had started it all. Helen was radiant, wearing a light blue dress Lucy had chosen, her white hair carefully styled by Patricia. Beside her, Robert held her hand, his eyes shining with pride. On her other side were Gabriel and Lucy, now officially engaged, with commitment rings that sparkled in the sun. Bea was just behind them with her family. Paul Harris represented the company team, and even Dr. Evans had come, fascinated by the recovery of his most extraordinary patient. When it was time for the speeches, Robert took the small stage. He began by talking about the importance of social projects, corporate responsibility, and community impact. But his voice began to tremble when he got to the personal part. 2.5 years ago, my mother disappeared on a cold night, and when I found her, I discovered she had been cared for all night by a stranger who had nothing, but gave what he could. That gesture changed 3 lives, my mother's, mine, and Gabriel's, and that change spread, touching everyone who is here today. He looked at Gabriel, who smiled encouragingly. This center is not just an architectural or social assistance project. It is a monument to a simple truth, that compassion has the power to transform realities. That one act of kindness can create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. Gabriel, would you like to come up here? Gabriel stood up, surprised, but walked to the stage. Robert hugged him tightly before handing him the microphone. When you took care of my mother that night, Robert continued, you didn't know you were saving her life. But you were also saving mine. You taught me that true success isn't about how much we accumulate, but how much we can give. This center exists because you exist. It is as much your creation as it is any of ours. Gabriel took the microphone with trembling hands. He looked at all those people, at the building he had designed with such care, at the sign that read, the Helen Miller Welcome Center, and felt an emotion so overwhelming he could barely breathe. I didn't do anything special that night, he began, his voice low. I just stayed with a woman who needed someone. Anyone should do that. But I discovered that not everyone does. And I also discovered that sometimes, when you help someone, you're actually saving yourself. He looked at Helen, who was watching him with that smile full of love. Helen gave me much more than I gave her. She gave me a family when I had no one. She gave me purpose when I was lost. She showed me that it's always possible to start over, no matter how far you've fallen. Then he looked at Robert. And Robert gave me an opportunity when all the doors were closed. He believed in me when I barely believed in myself. He taught me that there are good people in the world willing to make a difference. Finally, his eyes met Lucy's, and I found love when I thought I didn't deserve to be loved. I found a partner to build something bigger than ourselves. He took a deep breath. This center will welcome people who are where I once was, people who are invisible, forgotten, who think they have no more chances. And every one of them will hear what I need to say now. You have value. Your life matters. A bad moment does not define who you are. You can begin again, and we will be here to help. The audience erupted in applause. Many were openly crying. Gabriel stepped down from the stage and went straight to Helen, kneeling beside her chair. The old woman placed her hands on his face, her eyes shining with tears. My precious boy, she said, her voice as clear as crystal. You think you saved a little old lady lost on the street. But you were the one who saved me. You gave me a reason to stay, lucid, to fight against this disease that wants to erase me. Every day I wake up and know I'm going to see you is a day worth living. Gabriel held her hands, sobbing. I love you so much, Helen. You're the mother I lost and found again. And you are the son the universe gave me as a gift. The 2 I have now, she looked at Robert, who was approaching, are my greatest blessings. The 3 of them hugged right there, in front of everyone, in a moment of such intimacy and truth that even the most skeptical felt a tightness in their chest. Then it was Helen's turn to speak. With Patricia's help, she stood up, holding the microphone with hands that trembled slightly, but with a determination that left no doubt about her lucidity at that moment. "I have a disease that is trying to steal my memories," she began, her voice firm. "There are days I don't know what day it is or where I am, but there is one thing this disease will never be able to erase: the love I feel for these people here, and the certainty that life is worth living when we choose to love." She looked at the sign with her name on it. "It doesn't matter how much time we have. What matters is what we do with that time. It matters who we choose to share our days with. It matters if we left the world a little better than we found it." She pointed to the building behind her. "This place will help a lot of people. It will be a refuge for those who have none. It will be hope for those who have lost it. It will be a new beginning for those who think it's over. And that, my loves, that is what life should be. A chain of people helping people, of love generating more love." Tears flowed freely down the faces of everyone in the front row. Helen smiled, that smile that illuminated everything around her. "And if one day I don't remember any of this, if the disease wins and erases all my memories, I know that you will remember for me. You will remember this day. You will remember what we built together. You will remember that love is stronger than any disease, any pain, any darkness." When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The applause that followed was long, intense, and charged with emotion. Helen sat back in her chair, tired but happy, and Gabriel and Robert knelt on either side of her, the three of them in an embrace that symbolized everything they had achieved together. The Helen Miller Welcome Center opened its doors the next day. The first 20 people were welcomed that week, each with their own story of pain and resilience. Gabriel made a point of meeting each one personally, of shaking their hands, of looking them in the eye and saying, "You're going to make it. I know because I made it. And we're going to help you." In the months that followed, the center became a benchmark in New York. The media covered the project, other companies were inspired to create similar initiatives, and the city government approached Miller and Associates for partnerships in social housing. The impact multiplied in concentric circles, touching lives they would never know they had touched. Gabriel and Lucy set their wedding for the following summer. It would be a ceremony in the garden of the Helen Miller Center, with the people they had helped as guests of honor. They wanted to celebrate not just their love, but the community they had helped create. Robert and Patricia were planning to expand the company's social work, opening more centers in other parts of the city. Paul Harris, who had witnessed the entire transformation, had become one of the biggest supporters of the social projects, helping to recruit other business leaders to the cause. Bea was promoted to Director of Social Impact at Miller and Associates, leading all the programs and becoming a respected voice in the American nonprofit sector. Her work inspired others. Her passion was contagious. And Helen continued to defy the odds. 3 years after her Alzheimer's diagnosis, she still had more good days than bad, still recognized everyone she loved, and could still speak with clarity when it mattered. The doctors studied her case, intrigued, but the answer was simple for those who knew her. She had too many reasons to stay present. On a golden December afternoon, 3 years after that cold night when it all began, the whole family was gathered in the garden of the Upper East Side apartment. Helen presided over the table under the shade of a century-old maple tree, surrounded by everyone she loved. Robert and Patricia on one side, Gabriel and Lucy on the other, Bea with her new boyfriend, Paul Harris, who had practically become family, Dr. Evans, who came whenever he could, and even Sandra, the caregiver who had been there from the beginning. They were celebrating the 3rd anniversary of the Helen Miller Welcome Center, which had already welcomed and helped over 500 people rebuild their lives. Gabriel presented the numbers, the success stories, the upcoming projects. Helen watched them with that tender and wise gaze that age and illness had somehow refined rather than diminished. When Gabriel finished his presentation, she asked to speak. "Do you know what I've learned from all of this?" she began, her voice serene. "I've learned that you never know when you're going to find your real family. I thought family was just about blood, but you all taught me that family is who chooses to stay, who chooses to love, who chooses to care." She looked at each person present. "I got lost on those streets one night, And in that moment of greatest vulnerability I found my second son, she said, pointing to Gabriel. He didn't know who I was, had nothing to gain, but he stayed, and that gesture saved 3 lives. Now she looked at Robert. My son by blood learned that success isn't in glass towers, but in the hearts we touch. And he found a woman, she turned to Patricia, who sees the world in the same beautiful way he learned to see it. Then to Lucy. My son found a partner who fights the same battles, who dreams the same dreams. The 2 of you together are an unstoppable force for good, to be. And you, beautiful girl, with your heart the size of the world, making so many lives transformed. Finally, she looked at everyone. I don't know how much time I have left. This disease could take me tomorrow or in 10 years. But I know one thing. Every second I live surrounded by you is worth more than a whole lifetime without love. We don't measure life in years. We measure it in moments that take our breath away. And you give me those moments every single day. Gabriel couldn't hold back his tears. He stood up and hugged Helen with all his might, as if he could protect her from everything, including time. I love you so much, Grandma. It was the first time he had called her that, and the title sounded perfectly right. And I love you, my grandson of the heart, she replied, tears wetting both their faces. The sun began to set, painting the New York sky with shades of orange, pink, and gold. They all remained there, in the garden, talking, laughing, reminiscing. They remembered that cold night in Bushwick, the fear, the desperation, the unlikely encounter that had changed everything. They remembered every step of the journey, every obstacle overcome, every victory won. When the stars began to appear in the sky, Gabriel looked around and felt a deep peace. This was his family, not the one he was born into, but the one the universe had conspired to bring together. A family built on kindness, resilience, and unconditional love. Robert held Gabriel's hand on one side and Patricia's on the other. Who would have thought that one terrible night would turn into the best thing that ever happened to me, he said softly. It's because you learned to see the blessings disguised as tragedies, Patricia answered wisely. Helen, now sleepy but still present, murmured her last piece of wisdom for the night. Life is made of choices. We can choose bitterness or gratitude, hate or love, revenge or forgiveness, and each of those choices defines not who we were, but who we become. Those words hung in the New York night air, simple yet profound truths that each of them would cherish forever. The circle was complete. The young man who helped a stranger without expecting anything in return was welcomed by her and her family. The woman who got lost on the streets found in her confusion the path to reunite the people she loved most. The businessman obsessed with profits discovered that true wealth lay in touched hearts and transformed lives. And together, they proved that family isn't just who you're born with, but who chooses to stay when you need them most. That second chances exist for those brave enough to start over. That love, that feeling so often devalued by modern society, is still the most powerful force in the universe, capable of healing wounds that seemed incurable, of building bridges where there were only chasms, of making hope blossom where there was only despair. That night, as New York slept around them, that small group of souls intertwined by fate remained together under the stars, knowing they had found something precious and rare, a love that asked for nothing, that didn't judge, that simply existed in its purest form. And they understood at last that life can be unpredictable and sometimes cruel, but it is also capable of surprising with unexpected generosity when one chooses to open their heart. That happy endings are not the privilege of fairy tales, but the achievement of those who never give up on believing in human kindness, even when all seems lost. The story that began with a gesture of compassion on a cold night transformed into a legacy of love that would continue to spread for generations, touching lives they would never know, inspiring kindness in hearts that had not yet been born. Because that is the nature of true love. It multiplies infinitely, creating waves that never stop expanding, reaching distant shores we can't even imagine exist. And so, with the garden illuminated by the stars and the smiles of those who had chosen each other as family, this story finds its end. Not an end of finality, but an end of new beginnings. Because every end is just the start of a new journey, and the love they built together was only the beginning of something much greater.